Hello guys, welcome back. This is Kama and I'm going to be finishing up Yellow and Me. I think I wrapped up on chapter 10, and so I'm going to read chapter 11 and chapter 12. So there are 2 chapters left. Welcome back, my grandbaby and my baby Zande and Kim. So they're here with me, and we're wrapping up this book. So I'm so pleased with you for staying with me through the reading of this book, Yellow and Me. Very special book to me because it was the first book that I wrote, and I was 13 years old when I wrote this book. So it's dear to my heart. So we're wrapping up now. We're going to see how I concluded this book, Yellow and Me. So I'm on chapter 11. Everyone noticed the change in me. Yellow saw it, and he noticed it most. Art thou not coming to the service, Rodney boy? He asked of me. No, I said. I go into the church with Ma. Yellow looked sorrowful, as if he was a shepherd who had lost a sheep, and he knew very well that he would never find that sheep again. Thou art not coming to evening class either? No. His heavy lips pouted in sorrow. Not this sheep, he must have been saying. This sheep is special. This sheep must not go. But I walked off before he could stop me. I was just beginning to mature, just beginning to find my way around the network of happenings in my village and in my world, just beginning to focus upon things and analyze things and look deeply into things instead of just looking at them. There is a major difference between a boy and a man. A boy gazes blindly, but a man sees with large eyes that fate and fortune or misfortune had helped him to open. A boy trusts in things that experience would make a man condemn. A boy learns and a man teaches. At 15 years old, I became a man. I want to do preaching, Ma, I said, and she looked up at me, suspicious and smiling. Not like Yellow, Ma. I don't want to be like Yellow. I want to be a real preacher. You're going to be a fine preacher, Ma said. And that was all she managed to say before she broke down crying. Then she smiled again, and her face lit up, and a rainbow formed inside her eyes. There were still a lot of idle boys roaming the streets of Castleton. Some of them full-grown men in terms of age, but still behaving like boys. Niggs was now at his very best. He was an idol for the idlers, shorter and fatter because stolen food agreed with his body. But Ma didn't make any attempts to get Niggs off the streets. A burnt child dreads fire, and experience teacheth fools. An idler cannot change. When a man is born and reared in idleness, you cannot beat it out of him. You cannot even squeeze it out. If you should rip that man apart, cleanse him thoroughly, and then stitch him up back and put him back on the streets, he will become idle again. For idleness is luxury that we all hate to let go of. And those who are born with it try to hold on to it for life. There was word around Castleton that Yellow was collecting more money to build a large concrete church. There were about 15 members left in Yellow's congregation. Day by day you would see them going from house to house with their coconut cakes, begging us to buy from them so that they could build their church. Some were selling cow's milk and others were selling fruits. But Samuel Davis wasn't selling anything. because he didn't have any more cows to kill. He just walked around with the others and helped them to carry the buckets of milk. How much money you make so far? Corporal Jacobs asked Miss Tulsi. We have $50, Miss Tulsi said proudly. A concrete church going to take much more money than $50 to build, the corporal explained to her. It's going to take much more. But we're not finished yet, Miss Tulsi replied. We're still selling and more money coming in. I will help, the corporal said. I'm not on anybody's side, but the coconut cakes taste really good, and I will buy a few if I have the money. Then one day, Miss Tulsi came to us, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We make $80, she announced. We don't have anything else to sell just yet, so we have to keep this money and wait a little. And she seated herself down beside us like a proud woman who knew that she had done her very best and made her contribution to something bigger than herself. So where is Yellow? Ma asked. It's a long time now I don't see Yellow. He not really here just now, Mas Frederick explained. He gone into the wilderness to pray. The wilderness, we gasped. Yes, he leave last week. He said that he have to pray and thank God for the money. So, who have the money? Yellow have it. He said he couldn't trust to leave it here with anybody. What a foolish set of people, Ma said to me. They really think Yellow going to come back? He not coming back, Sister Joshua stated as a matter of fact. He's surely not coming back to these parts. Yellow must have been doing some really heavy praying. I've heard of Jesus going into the wilderness for 40 days. But 40 days seem to have been too short a time for Yellow to tell God all the things he had to tell him. Yellow don't seem to be coming back, Corporal Jacob said, voicing everyone's suspicion after 3 months had passed. He soon come back, man, Miss Tulsi said. I bet you any money that tomorrow you will see him. But tomorrow, and for many tomorrows after that, Yellow was not seen. You don't see what the man do to you? Ma asked them, but they refused to see. We have to start searching for him, said Corporal Jacobs. Not even God himself can stay in the wilderness for so long. So Corporal Jacobs went to search for Yellow, and when he couldn't find him on his own, he gathered a batch of policemen and went hunting. Soon we saw it in the papers, big headlines, in search of another prophet. And I must say that though we were angry at Yellow, we were proud to see the name of our village in the morning newspaper and the photograph of our own Corporal Jacobs along with the other policemen. We were proud indeed, and Mr. Isaiah cut out the article and announced that soon he would have it framed. Each time Corporal Jacobs came back to us, we asked, "You find him yet?" But he would just say, "No, but we're still looking." Then one evening he came to us. I think it was the same day that Jamaica got its independence, for I distinctly remember listening to the shouting and the singing over the radio just a few minutes before the corporal came. "We find him," Corporal Jacobs had said, and it was as if the whole nation was celebrating the capture of Yellow, while we rejoiced at our freedom from England's bondage. "Where you find him?" Ma asked. "In St. Catherine. We find him in a bar, still in his white robe, but the pressing come out of his hair, with a flock of girls around him. He there ordering liquor for everybody and telling them that he will pay." "I always know it," Ma said. "I know it from the minute he leave," Sister Joshua added. "So any money leave?" asked Mas Frederick, suddenly remembering how hard his cow had struggled to force the milk out of her, and how his hands had been tired from squeezing out the milk, which had not yet been ready to be released. It was now that Master Frederick felt it, and if any money had been left, he felt he should be the one to get it. Not one red cent left, the corporal told us, and Master Frederick's hands burned him more. So where Yellow is now? He at the station. So why you leave him at the station? Bring him down here so we can talk to him. So the next day, Yellow was brought into Castleton. I saw him, the man whom I used to worship, the man whom I thought was Jesus, the man who had helped the Spirit to come. And it was then that I realized how much I had suffered. But poor children must suffer because it is a rule of society. If you do not suffer, you do not learn. And if you are not learned, then you cannot be accepted. That was my reasoning at the time. Yellow had not gotten any fatter. The white gown that Ma had made 2 years before was still swinging freely from his body. His lips had gotten larger. No one couldn't help but think that all the liquor that he had drunk had accumulated inside his lips. My brethren and sistren, he began. But his lips were too heavy, and they closed after those words. Even after 1 day of confinement, he was still stiff, stone drunk. Nobody spoke. Pauline came out onto the veranda with Sheldon in her arms, both of them having the same silence that a judge must have before he hands down his sentence. Nick stood away off so that he could get a critical view of the scene. He wore a long look upon his face, a look which seemed to be telling Yellow that he had been warned. I tell you this would happen, Nick's eyes seemed to be saying to Yellow. I tell you. So there was Yellow standing in the midst of the street, not knowing whether to run or to stay. But stay he must, for his lips were too heavy, and they would keep him back if he tried to run. So he stood out of must and not out of will. The tension seemed to be getting to Master Frederick. His heart seemed to be telling him one thing, and his mind seemed to be telling him another. Sorry. But when a man is angry, his heart has no say in the matter. So Master Frederick listened to his mind and walked over to a pile of stones. No stones, Corporal Jacobs objected. You say you want to talk to him. Well, see him here. Talk, but no stones. I know the damage that stones can do. But Master Frederick had already gripped 2 grand stones tightly into the palms of his hands and was preparing to pelt the stones at Yellow, as if Yellow was an overripe mango, which Master Frederick had been long since admiring. So Master Frederick was going to take Yellow down from the tree. I say no stones, Frederick, the corporal shouted. Yellow watched as the stone aimed at his face and cut into his flesh, making the liquor spray from his lips in the form of blood. Then another stone clapped him. Then another, but Yellow didn't cry out. Then Samuel Davis, remembering his dearly beloved cow which his father had given him, began to walk towards the pile of stones. Samuel, stop right there. At the same time, a stone came in at the corporal, hitting the gun out of his hand and making him know that he must be quiet. More and more people walked towards the pile of stones. Somebody found a spot towards the corner of the road where rocks were. Rocks which Yellow had told them to gather to help him build their church. So the people used rocks, for stones were too small for this grand task. They aimed at his body, searching for a part of him which was fleshy enough to accommodate a good, lasting blow. But in finding no such area, the people just pelted. Then Yellow began to cry, the same cry that a mango makes before it hit the ground. Ma hid her face. Ma couldn't stand it. But Miss Tulsi and Miss Ruthie and all the other women were pelting stones at Yellow too. And Yellow there looking at me, wanting me to help him with his burden. He there thinking that I was Simon, but I drew away from him because I knew that I wasn't Simon. The stones bit into his body, tearing away his albino skin and coming into contact with his interior. His tears were bitter, bitter, so that whether or not they gave him vinegar to drink, every fluid in his body was as bitter as gall. The pile at the corner of the road was getting smaller. I could hear the radio inside the house with the people shouting cheerfully and happily in welcome of our liberty. And I wanted to clap because I was glad for my country, and I knew that if I clapped and rejoiced, I would have made it the irony of the century. The sun stood over Castleton in all her glory that day. She was a ball of fire, giving strength to the villagers just as she had done in the days of Joshua. She lit the village and cast her spears of sunlight upon the ground. For it was midday, and it wasn't yet time for her to leave us, so she stayed. When the final stone was flung upon his battered body, Yellow held himself upwards, blood streaming down his face. His arms stretched out, one to the east and the other to the west, his face looking towards where the gods were, as if to mutter something to them. Then he let himself fall to the ground from which he came. And when they felt sure that he was dead, the villagers slowly laid down their stones and wearily drifted away. Oh my goodness, Lord, they killed him. Oh my God. Guys, the people killed Yellow. It's the first I'm reading about this book in many, many years. I didn't even remember that. I mean, I know that they stoned him. I'm just remembering that he died. I wonder if I made him come back to life or something, or he didn't really die. I don't remember. I don't remember if he really, really died or I made him. I don't know. Let's see. So let's wrap up the book. Chapter 12. Wow, that's sad. It seems so funny now that I look back, seeing him lying there with ounces of blood spraying from his anatomy, like newly dug springs in an old limestone strata. He wasn't dead. See, guys? I knew something like that was... I kind of remembered. Okay. He wasn't dead, just half alive. His yellow hair was coarse and nappy, no longer soft and straight. With his eyelids half closed, much too weak to lift themselves up, you would dispatch tons of sympathy for him, and you would see his eyes, and his blood, and his eyeballs would remind you of bleeding turquoise. I knew some big words back in the day. I knew some big words back in the day, guys. He not dead, Corporal Jacobs announced. Thank God he not dead. And he ran over to him. Niggs was already there. Help me lift him up, he said to Niggs, as if giving out a command. But no, not a command, more like a harsh, desperate plea. We have to help him, the corporal said. He still can live. We just can't let him die. Niggs was indifferent. He could help if he wished, and he could walk away if he wished, depending on his mood, he must have thought. Everything was left entirely up to him. Yellow's life depended on whether he, Niggs, decided to offer his well-needed assistance. He contemplated. Should he? Why should he? But then, why shouldn't he? It was all left up to him, you know. No one could make him do it if it didn't please him. Yellow's life was left up to him, and that was good because he had warned Yellow all along. Now all Yellow's followers were gone, all the disciples and all the sheep. And who was he left with? He, Niggs, his friend and companion and fellow bandit. He, Niggs, whom he had grown with and argued with and learned to steal with. Niggs was filled with nostalgia, so he decided that he would help Yellow for old time's sake. Niggs, help me lift him up quick. So Corporal Jacobs and Niggs lifted Yellow into the police jeep. Then the jeep drove off. That was a sad evening. More so for me, it was not just a normal sadness. It was a sadness which was unexplainable, a heavy, wounded sadness, one brought on not by natural occurrences, but by a spiteful fate. My mind was a battlefield of confusion. It's milder now, for I am older, but then, when I experienced it, and when I was still midway between boyhood and manhood, and right and wrong, and sense and senselessness, I was bitter. Ma was there, but Ma didn't understand. There is a place in a boy's mind where not even his mother can go. Yellow had gone to that place, and when he left, in all my innocence and confusion, that part of my mind was shattered. I was still very young, and youth is not only a curse, but it is also a magnet for foolishness. That evening, as I watched the jeep pull out of the open land and drive way to the place where the sun was one with the land, I stood in dizziness and awe. Ma came to hold me, to keep me from falling. Most of the villagers had settled into their yards, and some had even gone into their houses and closed their doors, as if to indicate that the battle had been won, and they had resigned to calmer things. Dogs were still uneasy, and they went up and down the village, panting as if they themselves had been a part of the crucifixion. Nick stood upon the pavement, picking at his nose and scratching his head, as if something was tangled within his hair and refused to come out. It was all like a picture show to me. There was this vast screen, and I, among the rest, was within it. But I was lost. I didn't know my role. I didn't know what next to say. And even worse, I had no director. I've always felt that there comes a time in everyone's life when he stops, or at least pauses, and opens his half-closed eyes to the world around him. He realizes that trees are not just trees, but that they have roots too, and they have life, and that they could talk to us if we only let them. He realizes that there is a complex explanation to every simple thing, and a simple explanation for every staggering perplexity. Well then, staggering perplexity, we say. Okay, ma'am. He sees that life is not just a straight, smooth road as he had formerly imagined, but that life is a roundabout, a cycle which never ends, a circle which is not smooth but indented. No one tells him, but he knows because he's growing. He knows that his hands weren't particularly made to form mud castles from the native dirt, as was his childhood conviction, but that his hands are instruments, not designed merely to play, but to work and to construct. No one tells him, he just knows. I was going through that time in my life. A few days later, we got the news that Yellow was better. He wasn't well, just better. He would be tried in the courts as soon as he was released from hospital. Ma thought it would be good if I went to visit him, but I thought otherwise. I couldn't face Yellow. Whenever I thought of him, I felt inner bitterness. I made up my mind once that I would go out of mere neighborliness, since school was out and I had nothing else to do. I dressed and ate and gathered the lunch that Ma was sending to him into a neat bundle and tied it and went outside. But I couldn't go. I ran back to the steps crying, and Ma wasn't there. So I ate the lunch and told her when she came that Yellow was doing well and that he was extremely thankful to her for her kindness. I kept thinking how frightful it would be for me to stand before Yellow, to look into his face, and to finally confirm that it wasn't Jesus who was looking up at me from the hospital bed. Then I would pour tons of ridicule upon myself, not for having merely followed Yellow, but for swearing to the world that I was a sheep when I hardly had enough wool on my body to cover my loins. I felt silly and sorry. I could tell that Pauline was even sorrier. She and Sheldon were the living reminders, the living proofs, and even if we wanted to forget, and even if we were ever on the verge of forgetting, we would always remember. I had doubts as to whether Pauline would remember, for her facial expression and disposition didn't indicate whether or not her angry, ill-treated mind could carry out the menial task of memory, or anything else for that matter. It was mostly funny, but Pauline was what made it sad. Pauline was what made it tragic. Pauline was what made it real, tangible, and unforgettable. If it wasn't for Pauline, perhaps a few months later, we all would have laughed and said, "Imagine that Yellow coming into our lives and tricking us up, making us look like fools. That boy Yellow is a real joker, that Yellow." And we would smile to ourselves and shake our heads, knowing it was all over. But Ma knew and I knew that it wasn't all over. Sheldon was there and he was growing, and we knew that there would come a time when he would have mild interest in knowing who his father was. Then he would casually ask to be told, then he would ask suspiciously, and then he would demand to be told, and then all hell would break loose, and Ma would die out of sorrow and pain. Inwardly, she had almost blamed herself. Negligence? Maybe. Naivety? Maybe. It's odd sometimes when you walk out into the yard and the atmosphere is crisp, and you suddenly feel this strange newness about you which makes you tremble. I remember vividly now, a few months after everything, I was in the pig pen giving water to the hogs, sometimes taking some water for myself. It suddenly occurred to me that life was not just a sty of mud after all. It was a sty, yes, for it was sticky and heavy, and it kept you back when you wanted to move on. And it was a sty, yes, for it was filled with pigs rolling up and down inside it, wrestling for something to feed upon. And it was a sty, yes, for it was sometimes a world of stench and slime, and sometimes totally undesirable. But as I stood there in the sty of life, I realized that that was not all it was after all. It was more. For when the sun shone, it wasn't a cold, damp place, but it was dry and warm. And when the piggish individuals were asleep, it was a calm place and a calm thing after all. I came out of the sty and walked around the yard for a while. There I saw a flower. Really, there were hordes of them, and I had never seen any of them before. But there was one in particular which caught my eye. It was pink and pretty and appeared to be on the verge of breaking. It was ever so lovely. There was a break in the stem where it apparently had been chopped, and it was hanging there, ready to snap with the next gust of air from my nostrils. But then a plump little robin redbreast flew by and rested upon the flower, and I swore that it would break. I predicted that it would fall sharply to the ground, for the bird was small but fat. But it didn't fall. And I thought, what a delicate thing life is, with its gravity and balance, and its downfalls and its equilibrium. I thought, how delicate a thing it is that a bird should be able to mount upon a wounded flower and not cause it to break. And such a delicate thing too, that my huge boyhood nostrils should trap the sensitive aroma, the life force coming from that said flower. And even more of a delicate thing it is, that my rough, clumsy fingers would rest upon the soft feathers that said bird, and not cause it to shiver, or to move, or to try to fly away. It was then, I think, that I came into direct contact with the entity that is called God. I had never known him before. I thought, in the network of my childhood ignorance, that I had touched God when I felt Yellow's fingers within my own. And I thought that I had heard him many times, that I had heard his voice emerging from Yellow's lips during a sermon. And I had even thought that I had seen him in all his majesty, half concealed within Yellow's gown. But God was not in those mighty things. He was not in those extremely visible, extremely audible, extremely touchable things. But he was in the tiny things, like birds and flowers and even the air. It was a marvelous and delicate thing. I knew then that God could not be learned about, and he could not be taught about. Neither could he be seen as you see yourself in the mirror, nor heard as if louder than Congo drums. But he could just be felt through things that are small and sensitive, and heard through things that are silent, and seen in things that are almost transparent. And he could just be known without you having been taught, for he is an original knowledge that no university could grant, and no tuition could pay for. I was the happiest thing in the yard that day. I wanted to run and shout everywhere, and I even ran out into the streets shirtless and with my trousers smelling strongly of pig dung. And I shouted to everyone who was there. Lion must have known too, for he was always with me and he always knew. I wanted to run to Yellow and tell him what I had found. I can't remember if I ever did, for it was a very long time ago, but I still feel the same way now as I did then. I have seen many thieves and bandits clothed in angel gear on the rampage through the city streets in the guise of the Lord, but they don't trouble me. When they come, I may put a coin in their hats, if I have it, for I know that they'll use it to buy food when they are hungry. And when I see people following them around, I do not laugh, because I know that that's what they are searching for. I know what it is that they are searching for. And when I see Sheldon laughing at them as he drives by in his brand new car on his way to church, I do not laugh with him. And whenever I return to Castleton and I see Yellow, his hair almost fully white with age, sitting up on the pavement with his head in his hands and nothing in his stomach, I do not mock him like everyone else does, for I know what nobody else knows. I saw Yellow not very long ago. Come to think of it, he had recently been released from prison for the 4th time on the same conviction. And he saw me but probably didn't know who I was. But I have known so many things, and I have seen so many sorrows, and learned so much. And when I see children, my heart trembles at what might be going on in their tender minds. And I fear what mental death they might be battling with. For I know, and I was once a child too, as I have told you. The end. The end. Wow. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for staying with us. Thank you so much for staying with us through all 12 chapters of Yellow and Me. As I keep saying, a very, very dear book to my heart. I will be reading others of my novels. To date, I have 28 books, and believe me, it's growing. The number is growing. I won't be reading all the books, but I think the shorter ones, the earlier ones, I will read. And I'm so thankful to you again for staying with me